Learn the most empowering hiring techniques. Land the most desirable talent. Launch your company towards massive success. This is the Higher Power Radio Show with your host, Rick Gerard.
All right, so the process of hiring has not evolved much in the past 100 years. Now, we source people, we review their resumes, and then we choose people to invite in for an interview. But here's the problem. Resumes tell you very little about the person. In fact, I would go so far as to say that resumes are nothing more than bias builders. Now, here's what's not on a resume: performance. And we assume performance because of time spent at a name brand company or maybe schooling. And this assumption is the one thing that clouds our vision during an interview that leads us to bad hiring decisions. Hi, I'm Rick Gerard, and welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show. We help entrepreneurs and executives win the strongest people. We do so by sharing insights from top performing rebel entrepreneurs, game changers, and industry leaders like our guest today, Miss Kristen Prinz. Now, she's the founder and managing partner of the Prinz Law Firm. Now, Ms. Prinz has litigated employment law matters before state and federal courts. She has recovered millions of dollars on behalf of her individual clients and saved millions of dollars for corporate clients. And she's also been selected for inclusion in Crain's Chicago business list of the 50 most influential female attorneys, and has been named a leading lawyer by Leading Lawyers as well as Super Lawyer, which makes Kristen the perfect expert for today's topic. Kristen, welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show today.
Thank you, Rick, for having me. I'm excited to be on today.
It's a pleasure to have you. We got to know each other before the show, and prior to that, we're talking about the topic today is assumptive hiring. And we had a really good conversation about a story that you shared with me about maybe hiring an experienced attorney. So let's start with that. Let's dig into your experience of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard to find, the right fit for a company, but we had someone send us a resume a number of years ago, and people in my office got really excited because the attorney who was applying for the job, he was at a really large firm, reputable firm. It looked like he had all of the experience that we were looking for, that he could kind of step in. Most of our cases are pretty complex. I mean, we do employment law, but it's oftentimes complex employment law. And then we got really excited when we interviewed this person and he said all the right things. And so we didn't really put this person through our normal process. For example, they didn't take our skills assessment test, our culture. We have also a culture assessment. I mean, we've added all these things because we've had other mistakes in the past. But this person, we just thought we had to move really quickly, that they were going to get a different job. And so we did bring them on really quickly. People loved them. I mean, in the interview, he seemed like a great fit. And then he starts, and pretty quickly, I started getting feedback from other senior attorneys and partners. And almost immediately, one person said that she was not going to work with this person, that he didn't seem to have like a basic understanding of the work that we do, and maybe even just employment law in general. So that this is common. Okay, well,
so common. Like, I don't know how many times I've heard this story. So my experience has been, with executive search, and I cut my teeth placing software engineers in jobs in the Bay Area in tech companies. And I can't even tell you how many times I've heard this story. Oh my gosh, this person came out of Google and they have a really thorough hiring process, and it's really hard to get hired there, so that we assume that they were good. And
well, I mean, I feel like this was an extreme story, because for this guy, I was traveling for work and a client needed an employment agreement updated pretty quickly. They were making a hire. So I sent it to this guy and said, hey, can you review this and make sure that they have all the necessary terms? And referred them to something that we had done in the past too, that they could look at. Well, what we had done in the past, they we use different nomenclature. So in the law, you might say, will you sign an NDA? But most of the times in employment agreements, you're going to call it a confidentiality provision, right?
Sure.
Well,
Yeah.
this person reviewed our client's standard employment contract, which had, instead of calling it confidentiality, they did say non disclosure. Or instead of saying non-compete, they said post-employment restrictions, things like that. Well, this guy did not understand that these are the same things, so he basically copied and pasted other provisions with different nomenclature just on top of the agreement. And
Oh, they basically counteracted those pieces that were already in the agreement.
or like duplicated them, but just
Oh,
using
wow.
different words and didn't understand that they were duplicative. So anyway, then when I got back in town, I had to have somebody else fix it completely. But then I still said, let's meet on this because I wanted to see, is this like a comprehension problem or what?
Yeah.
And the person told me at the firm that they were at before, they weren't allowed to spend time on matters, so that they were very limited and they wouldn't, so they basically just threw things together, it sounded like. And I said, well, okay, at our firm we care about quality first. Like if somebody thinks about the amount of time you spent on something, we'll deal with that later, but quality is the most important. So I mean, I thought, oh, maybe I didn't set expectations, but it just got continued to get worse. And finally the two of us were on a phone call and I asked him, how do you think things are going? And he said, it feels pretty shitty getting so much negative feedback, which I is kind of funny. I don't know, it's not like the language that we use in our office anyway. Not to say like
Yeah.
everybody is prudish about language, but I was like, you know what? I agree. It is kind of shitty to like give
It's kind
somebody
of
so
shitty
much.
giving bad feedback
Yeah,
too,
it's
right?
not fun for anybody. So I said, do you think this is a good situation for you? Like, do you think you would be successful here? And he said, are you firing me? And I said, no, I wasn't planning to fire you, but like human to human, this doesn't seem to feel good for either of us. And I said, why don't we give you a night to think about it and you can come back and say and tell me if you think you could do this job and you could give us 100% and really be successful here, and I'll give you the runway to do that. But if you think this is not a good environment for me and I can't be successful here, I'll also give you runway. Like I'm not pushing you out the door. I don't want to damage your reputation or your career, but this is right now the direction we're heading in is not good. So I let our operations director know that this conversation was had. And the next day I get a call from her, from our operations director, that says, I just got an email from this attorney asking for a medical or disability accommodation, saying that he can't get feedback until after 3 p.m. Because I guess like something magical happens at 3 o'clock where you can all of a sudden get feedback.
What is he, a leprechaun or
I
something? Like,
don't know. I've never seen anything like that. So
wow.
I said, so our operations director was like, what do I say in response? I said, and we're employment lawyers, so you have to be really careful. So I said,
Sure.
just respond to him and say, thank you. We're happy to engage in the interactive process and see if we can give you a reasonable accommodation. I just want some clarity. Can you let me know? Kristen told me about your conversation yesterday. Is this accommodation what you need to be able to perform your job at the expectations of this role? And then the next day he quit and gave 2 weeks notice. But I mean, it was a really expensive and painful process. And you know what? He said is true. It was shitty. It was not
Yeah.
fun.
And
So
you know what? If you think about it, not to blame anybody, but it's just as much our fault as it is theirs. Not,
oh, it's 100% our fault because
okay.
we create the environment. I said
Sure.
to this person, that's why I didn't want to just say, oh, you're fired and you don't know how to do the job. It's our fault because the fact is, if we do our due diligence and if we set expectations, clearly this person didn't understand the expectations of the role. And we just assumed in our office that the expectations would be as high or higher at a bigger firm, when I really should have realized, like, in a big firm, you could have 10 people and you could easily hide. You probably don't have to work too hard because maybe a bunch of other people are looking at the same thing, and you're just maybe adding your one or two words, but you're not really having to use critical thinking. Where in our office, like, your work, it matters. It matters to us and to the client and to our reputation. So I
For
take full
sure.
responsibility that we were the ones that screwed up there on many many levels. So
I love you took ownership of that. All right, you're listening to the Higher Power Radio Show. I'm your host, Rick Gerard. And for our podcast listeners, we're going to take a quick educational moment from our sponsor.
Remember that feeling the first day of school, looking for your table in the cafeteria? Do you know anybody? Where are you supposed to sit? You don't know, but you definitely feel like there's toilet paper on the bottom of your shoe. Ugh, this is the worst. Well, you know what they say, high school never ends. I'm Anna Morgan, former corporate recruiter turned entrepreneur, and I know the workforce can feel just as complicated and clicky as high school. Trust me, I've been there. The layoffs, the imposter syndrome, the what the hell am I doing moments at 3 a.m. It all brought one point into focus. We all deserve a place to belong and learn. So I started this podcast just for us. Welcome to your Career BFF podcast, a place where everyone has a seat at the table, complete with masterclasses, no BS advice, and candid conversations with some of my favorite people. It's the Breakfast Club meets the boardroom. So whether you're the rebel challenging the status quo, the brain strategizing your next move, or the quiet wizard making magic behind the scenes, you have a seat. So grab your backpack, find your spot, and get ready to learn, laugh, and lead together. Because in this classroom, everyone's got a BFF. Class starts soon. See you there. Bye.
Okay, so I'm digging in deeper with our guest, Kristen Prinz. She's the founder and managing partner of the Prinz Law Firm. We're talking about assumptive hiring. We just heard a really common story that it's funny when you're the person who's sharing that story, you think, God, is this am I the only person who's ever done this? Every single entrepreneur that I've ever talked to on the show has this similar story. What's great here is that you recognized it really quickly and took action to make those changes. You had your aha moment. What did you guys do to solve the problem, Kristen?
I mean, we have made it a longer process. I've talked to you about this, about InterTrue too, about making sure that we're really asking the behavioral interview questions, because the fact is, everybody says, and I think anybody who owns a business has probably read the books or participated in some sort of education where you understand that hiring, i- you do need to ask behavioral questions, that you can't just rely on a resume. You can't rely on those like canned answers, because everybody can kind of figure out maybe what sounds good in an interview. But
Mhm.
the digging deeper, as you say, is really critical. So we have changed that part. We also don't bypass the like tests that we do even when we want to. There's so many times where I mean, I am a quick start. I have an entrepreneurial perspective. I just
Yep.
want to move. I want to like move fast and like figure things out. And I'm lucky I have a great leadership team that says, okay, no, we need to slow down and we need to make sure this is the right person. Because especially when you're in a business where you have like 20 employees instead of 200 employees, it makes a huge difference. Every
Every hire
person.
matters.
Yeah,
Every hire is super important. It doesn't matter if you're hiring somebody to take out the trash.
exactly.
Even somebody who comes in and takes out the trash interacts with other people in your business, and they have to be able to fit the culture and live the core values.
It's so true. And I think it's easy to downplay that when we're in a very, skills based, knowledge based business. So you think, okay, as long as the person can do the work, and I think a lot of law firms are run that way. Like, hey, as long as the person can do the work, who cares? We don't, they could be the biggest jerk, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But
It
it
does.
makes a huge difference.
It
That
does.
impacts
And again,
everybody
like
else around you, right?
I have these conversations with entrepreneurs all the time who have that attitude a little bit. And I'm like, well, okay, well, how do your people feel about that? I always share a story. I had a really top performing salesperson within my organization who was doing about two-thirds of the revenue, but nobody else in my team liked that person. That person fortunately quit, and
They were
actually the
managed out,
company.
or they really just quit?
No, kind of funny. They had gotten a job offer from another company, and the company actually sent the job offer to their work email address. And we were checking email while the person was on vacation. So we had the conversation. That person let me know that they were leaving. The week that that person left was the happiest the office had ever been. People were dancing, singing, having a great time. The following month, we tripled our productivity for a month. Very next month, productivity tripled. We went from 100K a month to 300K the following month.
Do you think if that person hadn't quit though, that you would have made that decision? Because we see a lot when we do these like culture audits for clients to see, what's going on and why people might be leaving, or why they're getting low scores on their engagement surveys. And I'm telling you, there's a lot of companies, they know something's going on, but they actually don't want to know who's really the problem, because I think they already suspect it, and it oftentimes is somebody who's like generating a lot of money. There's fear. We're always afraid of losing something.
I would have fought to keep that person on because I was a bad manager at the time too. Like I was not a very good manager. I was a high performing recruiter, but at the same time, I was actually taking classes to become a better manager because I didn't know what I was doing. I think the biggest mistake that most companies make, especially with salespeople, is they take their top performer and they promote that person to manager without actually giving them training or any education.
Well, it's
And
even worse when you're the entrepreneur and because
yeah,
I definitely am still working on being a better manager, because I think a lot of times when you're really good at your job, you feel like you could be good at anything, and you get some blinders about your own leadership skills. And when you're running
yeah.
an organization, that's kind of the most important thing, is like being a good manager, being a good leader. You know, it it's a shift, and we don't oftentimes take the time to really learn how to be better. Just like hiring, I think that that's such a skill. And it's funny because my husband, his company, they implemented like a really long hire, and you and I have talked about this, about how like take the time to really screen people, because the good ones who really want to work for your company, they'll go through the process and they'll stick
Yep.
around. And I'm like, how could you move that slow? Like they check all the references, they have this whole process, it's multi-stage. And that's what you and I have been talking about. And I'm like, oh, I don't, it's antithesis to it. Yeah. Antithetical to who I am as a person. And so, but I'm
When
realizing, I'm
you buy
like, no, I got to
into
get better. I got to keep
the
getting better.
when you buy into the feeding frenzy, because usually the candidate controls the pace. But when you buy into that, now you're buying into a transaction, and that most often you're not the person's first choice, number one, but secondarily, now you got to come up with more money, and the failure rate's usually much higher because of the fact that you didn't take your time to really understand whether or not that person is going to be a high performer in your organization.
Yeah.
Let's talk about setting up clear expectations. We had talked about that too, and I think this is a really important piece. What have you been doing to set clear expectations for the people that you bring in?
Uh, so I think I said we handle more complex matters. We also
Yeah.
handle, because we represent both companies and employees, oftentimes we're on short, tight deadlines. And I think there's a misconception sometimes that people think like, oh, you're in a smaller firm, so it's going to be more laid back and you won't have to meet the same expectations.
I don't know where people get that idea from.
I
That's the
know.
craziest thing.
I know. And it's actually, I feel like it's harder work because we're shifting and you're juggling so many things. So we emphasize that a lot more and ask more questions about like, how did that person spend their day? What was a typical day for them? Because for us, we don't have a typical day. I can't say, oh, I come into my office and I check my email and I do. Usually I come into my office and actually on my way to my office, people are calling me and I'm putting out fires before I even get in here. Just setting the expectation about what the expectations are in terms of, because we also want people to have a life. So we are also very respectful of like when you're taking time off and we want to cover for each other. We're very team oriented. I think it's easy to sell like, oh, it's so great and we pay really well and we also have tons of flexibility, which we do, but there's a trade-off. Like we do that because we expect you to work really hard, and not just that, but we expect your work quality to be like top tier. Yeah.
So actually outlining that up front and saying that, I'm glad you brought that up because so many times I've talked to candidates. Yeah, I'd like to go to a smaller company because I'd like to have more work-life balance. Okay, you're crazy. Like, go to a large company because that's where you get work-life balance.
Yes, exactly. I mean, talk to anybody who's like worked for a startup or worked for, a fast growing company. I mean, they're fast growth companies
Yeah.
because they are, you know, they're moving at a fast speed. Whereas like once you get to the size of, Google or PepsiCo, one of these like huge organizations, they're not, they're like behemoth, they're moving slow actually. You
Yeah.
might think like, oh, they're big, so they might pay you more to do less. So if that's
Well,
what
they
you're
do.
looking for, you should take that.
They do pay you more to do less. You're at that point in your career, by all means, go there. I think people who have worked at startups understand it so they'll say, I'm at a point in my career where I'd like to spend more time with my families. I'd like to be at a large company, which is a really good thing to understand too in the interview process because we have this need, the fear of losing out. We kind of start going into selling mode.
Yeah.
Well, we're flexible on time. Like you should really own the fact that we're a fast growing company. And quite frankly, you're not going to be happy here. And it's okay to say no and tell people that we are not that environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're better off if you say that and just
For
admit who
sure.
you are. I mean, I am like I love to tell people that in my own mind, I'm very laid back, but I am a super intense person who moves at a very fast speed. And I'm getting to the point where I'm like, oh no, this is how I will always be. This is how I operate. And if you like that, then it'll be great. Then we'll love working together. And not everybody operates at the same speed in my
Yeah.
office, but at the same time, I mean, I think if you're in like litigation and you like the adrenaline portion of it, then it'll be good for you. But if you're thinking, I just want to kind of like go in, chill, get through the day, maybe write a couple emails, you're going to be miserable here.
I feel like that's a whole different line of work.
Yes. So
All right,
true.
so talk to me about overcoming your own biases because I think that's something that I definitely want to kind of wrap up with.
The
You
biggest thing is about
to
firm size, I think, for
yeah,
us, or like education. Oh my gosh, sometimes you see like this person went to a top tier law school or a top tier undergrad. And uh, I gotta say, like going to law school and doing well in law school is not always indicative of being a good lawyer. So
yeah.
that's a bias that we have a lot. Yeah.
Harvard has a bottom 10% of attorneys who've graduated there too.
Yeah. Well, even people who graduate in a top portion of their class, they might be really, I've generally found, because I work with a ton of smart people, and most of our clients are so incredibly smart. But oftentimes people are smart in a certain way. Like it's
Yeah.
very rare that you meet somebody who is like, oh, they're smart in every possible way. And those people do exist, but most of us are like, oh, I'm really good at this. And the fact is, somebody who might be top of their class at Harvard, maybe they're not going to be really good at understanding employment law because it's so human specific. Maybe they're just really great at drafting like M&A contracts, which is complicated and hard.
Yeah.
And but that doesn't mean they are going to be good at what we do.
I think Google put out a study quite a few years ago where they talked about the number one school that that actually fostered the most successful hires for them wasn't an Ivy League school. It was actually the University of Illinois.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Well, University of Illinois has a great tech program, and it
Yeah.
actually has some of the top talent comes out of University of Illinois. So
If you think about it, it's not Stanford or MIT. It's not like this prestigious school, but the most successful people came out of that one school. They own everybody that comes out of that school that has promise, I would imagine.
it's very true. Yeah, I mean, I think that proves the point is that you get these biases because people tell you like this is the number one, and it's not always true. And also, just because that person is incredibly smart, is this going to be an environment where they can be successful? Because I don't want to have a
Boom.
business where people can't be successful here.
And that comes down to whether or not the person's positioned. Do they really want to work in a firm like yours? Do they want that more so than you want them to be successful? That's really what's the most important thing. Well, shoot, we're getting pretty close on time. What would you say would be 2 or 3 key takeaways you can give the audience that can plug into their business today, Kristen?
Definitely set the expectations, take your time, make sure that the person really does meet your culture and your values, and be clear on your values. So many times companies have these values that are just throwaway, they're marketing and they're not really embedded in the organization. Make sure everybody on your team or everybody in your organization understands what are the values and is that something that everybody's aligned on. So those are
So
my
very true.
tips.
Kristen, thanks so much for your time investment today. And I want to welcome you to the Higher Power Radio community. What would be the best way in which members of the audience can find you, find your firm?
Definitely on LinkedIn. And also you can always email me. There's other Kristen Prinzes out there. So my email is kprinz@prinz-lawfirm.com.
And that's Prinz with a Prinz, correct?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank our listening audience for tuning in to this week's episode of Higher Power. Quick thanks to our team, Brian Colburn, Andrea Ballin, and Ayla Gerard. If you're listening to the show, please subscribe, review, and share. After all, this show's for you, and we welcome your feedback week after week. You can join the Higher Power Radio community at Higher, H-I-R-E, Power, P-O-W-E-R, radio, R-A-D-I-O.com, or you drop me an email at rick@intertrue.ai. I'm your host, Rick Gerard, and you have been listening to the Higher Power Radio Show. Aloha.
Thank you for listening to Higher Power Radio. Catch our LinkedIn Live show every Tuesday at noon, or download the podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform. We appreciate you joining us on Higher Power Radio with your guide to hiring success, Rick Gerard.